Climate change is no longer an abstract issue. The changing climate is visible, and report after report have pointed to the fact that the world will hit 1.5 degrees in less than 10 years from today. But today we're going to discuss what you and me can do. But let's put things in perspective. The science is clear regarding the vulnerability of Africa's region, and two aspects are noteworthy. The first is that Africa is already heating up twice as fast as the rest of the globe. And some 20 African countries cutting across all the regions of Africa are already warming faster than the globe. The point, therefore, is that the biophysical effects of climate change are universally felt across the continent, and any regional differences are minor. The second point is that the causes of this vulnerability are both physical in terms of the climatic variability that we are experiencing today, and they are also socioeconomic. On the physical front, Africa's climate is naturally highly diverse and variable. To begin with, within the same continent, we have extreme aridity of the Sahara deserts and extreme humidity of the Congo rainforest. These extreme circumstances, to begin with, makes the multiplier effect of the changing climate far worse compared to other continents that are not as diverse. On the socioeconomic drivers of vulnerability, while climate change effects are global, the poor are disproportionately vulnerable to its effects because they lack the resources they need to afford the goods and services to buffer against the worst of the changing climate effects. So what does this mean? If you take a very typical example, while developed countries and developed places across the world are experiencing the changing climate impact, we were talking category 5 cyclones quite regularly seen these days, including the recent extreme events we saw in China, in Europe, and across the world. Many of these countries do not experience the level of damage as we see in Africa, as was the case with Cyclone Idai and Kennedy in Southern African region. A higher socioeconomic base enables populations to be in a position to afford alternatives to mitigate their losses and risk as insurance. For example, it is reported that in Louisiana, one of the risk-prone areas in the United States that experiences hurricanes, homes and business owners file up to $10 billion in insurance claims for damage caused by hurricanes and tropical storms in 2020. In contrast, Cyclone Idai and Kennedy that hit Southern African region and caused a trail of losses and fatalities cost damages exceeding $3 billion. There was no talk of insurance among the most vulnerable. We talked about the Indian Ocean dipole that caused abnormal rains up to 400% above normal in East Africa, and catalyzed the worst locust outbreak in 70 years, cost up to $8 billion in food loss. There is also no talk of insurance compensation among the most vulnerable smallholder farmers. What does this mean? Without the ability to afford alternatives, communities are literally constrained in the ability to respond effectively to escalating climate change risk. The point, therefore, is simple. The core solution to climate vulnerability in Africa is one word: socioeconomics. The big question then becomes, what steps can you and me take? Can you and me as individuals or a community take to address climate change? And the answer is in two words: just transitions. We must limit emissions to lower temperatures, what is traditionally called mitigation. That must happen. We must invest to prevent the physical risk of the changing climate, such as building climate-resilient infrastructure, such as building climate-resilient agriculture, and the list goes on. That we call adaptation. But most importantly is how our actions taken to buffer this risk can unlock a pathway of inclusive and accelerated socio-economic growth and drive enterprise development to justly transition communities to low carbon, to low climate risk, and to share prosperity. And for this, we have to take the following steps. And the first step is this: as individuals, we must graduate ourselves into policy implementers. We must become policy implementers. While policy is the biggest driver of change, it does not implement itself. Neither is it the responsibility of government alone to implement. Non-state actors like you and me, citizens, individual citizens, and especially the young people who constitute the bulk of the population, are the biggest stakeholders of implementers that have not been tapped into. We therefore must ask ourselves what we are doing to implement the policy measures already put in place by African countries. They have ratified the Paris Agreement, and most of Africa's nationally determined contributions are focused on land-based actions that are responsible for up to 56% of Africa's emissions. All these are areas that can be tapped with very accessible, non-capital intensive, income-generating actions. As individuals, we need to study these policy commitments and establish areas we can engage in to unlock enterprise opportunities while also driving the climate ends envisioned in such policies. These actions will then provide empirical data of what can work on the ground, and initial successes in such can lay an objective basis for citizens and communities to demand more targeted incentives to make it easier and more profitable to invest in driving the implementation of climate action in the continent. For example, waste recovery to fuel briquettes is a known capital-intensive area that you and me can start. Young people across the continent, which we are structurally guiding these willing young people to engage in this waste recovery to create alternative product lines to tap the charcoal market value at $20 billion US and a large market base of 80% of households in Africa. At the same time, these alternatives are engaging communities to implement climate action. That we are doing. You can do it. The second is, individuals and communities must take advantage of existing policy incentives and act on them. We say, no, there are no policy incentives. There are policy incentives. For example, Kenya in its 2021 Finance Act has exempted 3 classes of clean cooking from 16% VAT tax. The aim is to attract implementation investment in these areas. Individuals need to take leadership as local investors to invest in these areas and enter either as consumers or entrepreneurs to develop these clean cooking fuels. Clean cooking briquettes are among the class of fuels that have been exempted. So citizens need to tap these incentives and establish enterprises in developing these classes of clean fuel. You will never have enough. Work with what you have before you ask for more. That takes me to the third point. Purposeful passion is important and a right attitude. Policy incentives, regardless of how timely they may be, will accomplish very little if they fall on passionless citizens. A mindset of believing that it is the responsibility of government alone to formulate policy, to legislate policy, to implement policy, to monitor implementation and report back on progress are not the kind of mindsets that will drive climate action. Yes, I say it again. On the contrary, a critical mass of individuals who take the implementation of policies as a personal responsibility, who are selfless to look at what they can do in such implementation to touch many lives, is what will bring impact. We must cultivate that attitude of taking initiative. And the fourth is self-discipline. Cultivating passion is just one, but what will sustain it is self-discipline. Discipline means doing things not because it is favorable to do so, but because one has a deep-seated conviction that it is the right thing to do and that they must do it right. This is what makes the difference in establishing long-term success. And that takes me to the last point, skills retooling. Climate change, ladies and gentlemen, is a moving target. And what we need to ask is, how can each and every one of us do in every field we are in, or become a creator of socio-economic opportunities from the climate action lens? Whether you are a journalist, for instance, the work you do is critical to shaping narratives. What you need to ask yourself, wherever you are, is how can the news presented on climate change move away from projecting liability and risk, as is currently the case in the mainstream, to start projecting investment opportunities for accelerated socio-economic transformation? Whether you are a young artisan, what you need to start asking yourself is, how does your skill, how can your skills be applied to develop sustainable products that are on demand in the community in which you are, like fuel briquettes? Getting to this level calls for what I call skills retooling. Each one of us must improve, must refine, must adapt our skills to align with this paradigm shift of creating enterprise opportunities out of climate action. But the good news is that through the incubation approach that we have developed called innovative volunteerism, we are seeing a movement across the continent, structurally guiding young people, inspiring willing young people to turn their passions into profit and retool their skills in developing and decentralizing climate action solutions that address on-demand gaps in the community. Young people, they are retooling their skills and decentralizing these solutions, locally available material, decentralizing them like solar dryers to communities through a model called pay-as-you-go. For example, in Uganda during the COVID-19 period, decentralizing this simple solar dryer developed by youth, fabricated by youth, to the informal food traders cluster into communal groups for economics of scale ensured reduction of pumpkin losses by 28%. This was just in 1 month. Earnings from dry high-value cassava increased by 100%, while the youth who decentralized this were able to earn from offering these drying services. This was in a trial group of 500 women, and the impact was registered just in 1 month. What does this tell you? In our own ability and capacity, we can take climate action. Take climate action. today.